that amount of time. Does that sound good?
4 minutes.
Yeah, at 4
That's fine.
minutes.
That's good. I'll put this back here somewhere. Can I?
שרון,
אז מי פה ישראלי?
You know, I
אני
didn't
הבאתי
realize
חצי
until
מהחברים
today
הנוצרים שלי, אתה רואה
that
פה,
it was also
חצי מהאנשים פה נוצרים.
Yeah,
That's
so
fine. I
if
just
you say something particularly smart, it could go viral. If you say something particularly stupid, it could go
It
viral.
will go viral.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
That's,
I have to remember that.
Eytan says that half of the people here are his Christian friends.
Oh, okay. Fine. Fine.
אז מי ביניהם ישראלי?
ישראלי? אני לא רואה איפה אתה רואה ישראלי.
אני שואל, לא מכיר את כולם.
לא, ישראלים לא באים. ישראלים אין שאלות קשות על ישראל.
פרחוצ'י כזה עם המשקפיים.
זה שחיבק אותי עכשיו?
זה שיושב שם.
דייביס? כן, דייביס, אפשר להגיד.
This is there's like an article that I really want to be writing right now. It's not exactly about this, but this is fine too.
הנה, יהיה לנו שאלה פה פלסטינאית חזקה הערב.
Good evening, friends. Thank you for gathering here this evening. Thank you to those of you who are tuning in on YouTube. It's lovely to see such an eclectic group in our sanctuary this evening. I'm Rabbi Ruhi Sophia Matzkin-Rubenstein, the rabbi here at Temple Beth Israel. And before I ask our panelists to introduce themselves, I want to invite you all to silence your cell phones. I won't ask you to turn them off because it is not Shabbat or a holiday, and if you need to get up and take a call, that's fine. If you need the bathrooms, they are near the entrance to the building, and because we are a synagogue in the United States in 2023, you should know that the emergency exits are on both sides of the bima, our raised dioceses. So I want to say just a thought about what tonight is and is not. We are obviously hosting a panel about your tough questions about Israel, and the people on this panel will introduce themselves in more detail shortly, but I will say what they have in common. They are members of Temple Beth Israel. They are Jewish. They all believe, though they have perhaps strategic differences in what this looks like, in the inherent right of Jewish people to have a homeland in the land of Israel and the inherent right of Palestinian people to have a homeland there. And so the variety of opinion that is expressed here doesn't extend beyond sharing, doesn't extend to people who don't share those principles and those opinions. And I want to acknowledge that there are people who don't share those opinions. That feeling is unfortunately, I think, more and more rare in the common discourse nowadays, and we will be hearing from them now. I'm going to ask each of them to introduce themselves and to specifically share the aspects of your respective identities, your training, your expertise, your life experience that are informing how you understand this moment right now. And then I'm going to have one follow-up question, and then we're going to open it up to your questions. So who would like to go first?
Thank you, Rabbi Ruhi. Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming. I'm Diane Baxter. I was raised in a Jewish household that knew absolutely nothing about being Jewish, except that we were Jewish. When Passover would come, my family had no idea what to do. They knew not to put bread on the table, but that was really about the extent of what they knew. However, I grew up in a household that was completely devoted to and supportive of Israel. And I grew up not questioning that at all. I don't question the right of Israel to exist, so that has not changed. But I think that my understanding is far more complicated now than it was when I was growing up. I have a doctorate in anthropology, and when I was determining what I would do, there were a number of possibilities, but I finally decided that I was going to live on the West Bank with a Palestinian family. And so I went to, in 1986, I lived in a village on the West Bank, a village called Beit Jala, which is not far from Bethlehem. And I did live with a Palestinian family for a summer. And then I determined, yes, I was going to go back and live in another Palestinian village with another family for a year, which I did. And if you think about the dates, I left the United States to go live with Awatif's family in the summer of 1988. If you're recalling dates, the Intifada began in December of 1987. So I was there for a year during what probably was the most active part of the Intifada. So here I am, a Jewish woman living with a Palestinian Muslim family. It was a tremendously wonderful, challenging experience for me. I learned a lot about myself, and I certainly learned a lot about Palestinian perspectives. I learned a lot about what it meant to live during an uprising, if you were a Palestinian. And then I lived there for a year. I wrote my dissertation about the Intifada, what it was like, life for Palestinians in various places, a village, a middle-class neighborhood in Jerusalem, and a refugee camp. So since that, I have taught at George Washington University, and I've been at the University of Oregon for 27 years, I think. And for many, many years, I have taught the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which I continue to do. I will be teaching it again starting in January. As you can imagine, this is going to be an extremely challenging course to teach, given what's going on. So that's me and a little bit about my experiences.
No, you go.
My name is Shaul Cohen, and forgive me the presumption of having my arm on the back of Diane's chair. We're together, so I allow myself that presumption. So I was raised in a home that had, mostly as an unspoken but very present element, the fact that my mother was a Holocaust survivor and my father's people, their experience was Russian pogroms. And they didn't take our safety for granted. And Israel was something that was held up to us as miraculous and as refuge and as a source of identity. And as a kid, my father would buy for my brothers and me the books that were written about the army and books that were written by generals and about generals, biographies and autobiographies. And that was kind of a steady diet. And it was something that was in the context of we need to be strong, and at the same time, we need to be aware of others who are vulnerable, that other people's troubles are our business too, because nobody did for the Jews, or not enough people did for the Jews, when our times were bad. In the Army, I was in the Golani Brigade, a combat unit, infantry. I went in during the Lebanon War and spent a bunch of time in Lebanon, other time West Bank, Golan Heights, Gaza. And one of the things that I managed to do in what some of the time was the daily grind of being in the places inhabited by other people was I found ways to talk with them. Even though I'm wearing a uniform and I have a rifle slung around my neck, I wanted to do my best to respect them and to lessen my impact. When I got drafted, they gave us our uniforms, they took our fingerprints, they gave us dog tags. The very first thing they did when we were done with that was to sit us down with reserve officers who initiated with all of us small group conversations about what is an illegal order and why you are obligated to disobey an illegal order. So that was our first conversation in the Army. What's legal, what's not, what are your obligations? And I tried to honor that spirit throughout my service. Things can be messy at times, but the purity of arms notion, Tohar HaNeshek, that was part of the IDF was something that I took very seriously. After the Army, I got involved in doing research in Jerusalem, West Bank, with Palestinians, also during the Intifada, and with Israelis as well. It was unusual for me, looking as I do, to be in Palestinian towns and villages and homes and in their fields and orchards at a time where on site people would identify one another and hostility was what was presumed. One of my dissertation committee members was a famous Palestinian historian, and he wrote me effective letters of introduction that got me started, and then I got passed around so that I was able to circulate in the Palestinian community. Later, Diane and I began to work alongside one another. I got to know her Palestinian family and be part of it. And one thing that Diane didn't mention is that we're still part of that family and they're still part of ours. And some of their family members lived in our home in Eugene for periods of time. And that's not a blood bond, but it's a family bond, and it remains very strong for both of us.
Thank you. My name is Eytan Turjeman. I lived and grew up in Israel till 7 years ago when we came to Eugene with my family. Started my relationship with Palestinian when I was 3.5 years old, where they murdered my sister. So I grew up on hating Arabs. Not that I do now, I'm just telling you my background. That's how I grew up, that was my house. And I think it's understandable in a way. When I went to the Army, I wanted more than anything else to kill terrorists. And in my first face-to-face combat with terrorists who infiltrated Israel and wanted to kill children, I thought to myself, wow, no, I don't want to kill anybody. I mean, I want them to die because I don't want them to, of course, kill children, but it's not, I don't want to do that. I don't want to avenge. That's not how I want to spend my life, with anger and avenging. The rest of my service, I mostly saved lives rather than taking them. I was a medic my first 3 years in Lebanon with the Shiites, and then 9 years of reserve army in the West Bank with Palestinians. Luckily, I never killed anyone, but I saved many lives. But I've seen many deaths from both sides, and it's painful, no matter who's dying. Then I went to law school, and at the age of 30, I started my spiritual path, spent about 5 years studying all kinds of modalities and doing my spiritual path and leading spiritual retreats. When we moved here 7 years ago, after like 2 years after we moved here, I went to Yuval Law School for Conflict and Dispute Resolution Master's Program, and then I took an amazing class led by an amazing professor called Diane Baxter. And since then, for the 3rd year, I'm tutoring her class. So that's like my background about the conflict. Another aspect, which I usually don't speak about in larger group, is I lead spiritual retreats all over the world, especially in Mount Shasta, and I did a lot of work in Jerusalem and other places in Israel. Some of them are related to the conflict, but from the energetic or spiritual perspective. I will talk about it if you're interested. If not, I'll focus on other aspects. Just know that I have these two parts of me. One is like the physical, emotional, facts. I study radical Islam, which I'm going to talk about. And the other one is going a little bit higher and seeing things from a spiritual perspective, which for me is more interesting than the rest. But I'll talk about it only if you want to.
Thank you all for your introductions, and I really appreciate how personal your experiences with this are. And I think so many people are talking about this abstractly and dispassionately and analytically, and we're forgetting that this is deeply personal. This is about people's lives. This is about people's families, blood families, chosen families. It is not an abstraction for Israelis, for Palestinians, for anyone who has a loved one in Israel, in the West Bank, in Gaza. And so as much as I'm going to be asking, and perhaps you will all be asking, analytical questions, I want to just honor that there is a personal dimension, and we can't expect, the idea of objectivity is unrealistic, and I want to honor the space that each of you are coming from and bringing to this. With that in mind, I want to ask kind of an analytical question. When people think about this conflict, when people talk about this conflict, and especially if they are articulating taking a side on this conflict, they always have somewhere they choose to start the clock, right, that we have to go back to, whether it's the clock starts on October 7th, or the clock starts in 1967, or the clock starts in 1948, or the clock starts in 1929, or the clock starts with the expulsion of the Jews from the second period of autonomy in 70 CE. Where do you think it is important, when do you think it is important to start the clock in your presentation of understanding of this conflict and what's happening right now? And I'd like to hear each of you answer, but
So do you want us just to give a year or a decade, or explain a little bit? Okay, okay. I know, okay. This was, Rabbi Ruhi sent this question to us, I guess yesterday, and I've been thinking about it. It's not an easy answer for me to name a date or even a decade, but I will, and I'm going to start mine in the 1930s. Now, I know that there's a longer history and can go back to before the Common Era. It can go back several thousand years. However, I would argue that the modern conflict really took off in the 1930s. And it hasn't been at all a steady progress to when we got to right now. But here's why I'm going to choose I have chosen the 1930s. The 1930s is when in Palestine, and you all know, I'm sure, that there was no state of Palestine. It was a territory. In the 1930s, it was part of the British Mandate. Before that, part of the Ottoman Empire. So there had been no state of Palestine since biblical times, just like there had been no state of Israel since biblical times. But it's in the 30s that more and more Jews immigrate into Palestine. It's that time when it is not at all uncommon for Palestinian sharecroppers, mostly sharecroppers, to be removed from their land so that Jewish labor could fill those jobs. It was during that period of time when Palestinians, and I'm going to call them Palestinians because they begin to call themselves Palestinians in the 1920s. Before that, they called themselves Arabs, but they develop a Palestinian identity and they begin to call themselves Palestinians in the 1920s, so I will too. So during the 30s, there's more and more land purchases. And at this point, they're legal. Land was not stolen from the Palestinians at that point, but there were land purchases, and so more and more of these Jews who don't speak Arabic, who don't look or dress like the people there, who certainly are not Muslims, begin to populate the area. And it's when Palestinians begin to get scared and worried that what is going to happen to the land that they're hoping will become a Palestinian state. It is not, they're hoping it will. And I could go on into what happens in the 40s. Absolutely, the partition plan that was not accepted by the Palestinians or other Arabs is a watershed event. The Israel declaring statehood in 48, a watershed event. 1967, war and the occupation of Gaza and the West Bank, a watershed event. And I could keep going, but I'll stop now and say that's the 30s for me is where I would begin now.
Just as preface, I want to say, and I think it's important, I study ethno-territorial conflict in different parts of the world. There isn't so much in our situation that's unique. It's different in that other people think they have business in our territory because of world religions and whatever else. But people fight over identity and territory, and that's part of the human condition. Rabbi Ruhi spoke of sides, and I also want to say that if we approach, so long as we approach by saying we're on this side or that side, we all lose. It can't be them or us. It has to be them and us. The space is very small and we're bound up with one another. And anybody who advocates for one side at the expense of the other is perpetuating the conflict. So that's not a way to go. Diane put in motion some of that timeline, but again, coming back to the way that the rabbi framed the question, I would say right now for me a critical moment is that UN resolution in November of 1947, which said some of this will be an Israeli state that will be governed by the Jews, and some of it will be an Arab state that will be governed by the Palestinians. And the Jews debated around that and quickly said yes, and the Arab world, more so than the local Palestinians, but them as well, said no. And why did they say no? They didn't want a Jewish state there. They didn't want part of that territory. They wanted the Jewish enterprise to cease and for there to be Palestinian sovereignty from the river to the sea. And as we get the current discourse about who's right and who started what, again, I am dismayed by taking sides, but I think it is vital to remember that the reason that there isn't a Palestinian state, one of the reasons that there isn't a Palestinian state today is because the Arab world said no to that when the UN voted yes to that. And it wouldn't be perfect had it been different, but it would certainly be different. So there are many important moments, but for me currently, and not just currently, that's one that stands out.
I also like the number 30, but for me this conflict started about 30,000 years ago. That's a very spiritual thing that I'm not going to elaborate right now, so I'm going to go back to about 3,000 years ago. Abraham and Ishmael and Yitzhak, I think that's where it started in our known history, and it's been passed on generation by generation and created a conflict between Arabs and Jews. And when the next point was Mount Sinai for me, when we were supposed to receive the first tablet and we didn't, and we did the golden calf thing, we started our falling down and other nations starting to look at us and say, hey people, you're not fulfilling your a covenant with God. Why am I saying that? Because that is what radical Muslims say about Jewish people right now. You had a covenant with God, you did not fulfill it, you got the state of Israel. If you fulfill the covenant with God, you did not, that's why you shouldn't be in the state of Israel, and this is our state. That is what they say. Now, in order to understand the conflict, you have to understand ideology of both sides. And when I say Islam, I usually refer to radical Islam. And so just let's put it in perspective. Of course, not all Muslims. Their main problem is not that they don't have country, is that we have. Because when Islam came on 600 something, they basically said all other religions are obsolete, they shouldn't exist. Judaism, Christianity. And for them to see us having a country, a Jewish state, doesn't make sense. If Judaism doesn't exist, how can they have a state? That is why they have a problem with us. So I think this conflict started long before the 30s or 47. It just got a different perspective back then. I mean, think about it. I mean, the Palestinians did not have aspiration for a state until, like, I think 67 or something like that, when the PLO. They still hated us. They hated us before we had a state. You know, I mean, Amin Husseini, the Mufti, you know, collaborated with Hitler to kill Jews, and it goes, you know, back long ago. They are, in the radical Islam, they are instructed to kill Jews. Sorry, it says in the Quran. And you know, have a jihad war, which means conquer the world and apply the Sharia laws. The state of Israel is just one stage in this big plan, and they say it, you know, explicitly. You know, go listen to the Muslim Brotherhood, go listen to Yusuf Qaradawi. That's what he says specifically. So I cannot take out the conflict out of the context of the global jihad and what radical Muslims thinks about Jews and the world in general. I think it's a conflict of religion, of ideology, and not just borders and geography.
So this sets up. These are our speakers. This is where they're coming from and when they're coming from. And we did build this session as your tough questions about Israel. I have plenty more I could ask these panelists, but I do want to open it up to you all. I would just ask everyone to agree to ask questions. If you need to talk a little bit, if you need to externally process a little bit to get to your question, that is okay. But if you're going to come to the mic, I would ask that you wind up at a question that you are curious that you would like to hear one of the presenters respond to, and to please refrain from any personal attacks on the integrity of any speaker. And I know that our speakers will refrain from disrespectful speech to any questioner. And with that prompt, the microphone is open. If it's taking you more than like a minute to get to your question, I might goad you. But other than that, feel free.
Hello, my name is Davis Ozdegan, and it kind of struck me how thoughtful all of you are, and I wanted to ask you, what podcasts do you listen to keep yourself informed and learn more about what's happening, and hopefully an answer from all four of you.
My answer is really quick. I don't listen to podcasts. I read a lot of articles from a whole variety of both academic and popular magazines, but I don't listen to podcasts. So that's really simple.
I don't listen to podcasts, and I'm skeptical of social media. it's hard to find quality information. One of the things that I try to do is hear voices from the region, and the newspaper Haaretz is printed in English. You can get it by subscription online, and they have better quality information. But I also have to say, currently, I'm filtering. There are things that are occurring that I don't want inscribed in my visual memory, and I know that they're happening, and I'm paying attention, but I also am filtering.
I don't listen to podcasts either. I do watch YouTubes and read articles, some in English, but mostly in Hebrew. I care what people say to their people, not what they say to the West, because I think these are two different stories, two narratives. So I'm interested in the original, and I think in the West sometimes they like to dilute the messages or, see things differently. And I read it, but for me it's not the truth. That's for like the physical aspect. As for the spiritual, that's a different dimension. It's not on podcasts. It's in the spiritual realm. So this is information that either I research myself or read others or just feel it.
I only listen to podcasts about Torah and the Talmud, which is, I'm going to say that because I think it is relevant when we talk about a Jewish state. We all mean something different by what Jewish even is. And for me, I find it very grounding to, on a weekly basis, be like immersing myself in some form of Jewish teaching that is more timeless than what is happening right now. That is very actively keeping me sane. And in terms of what I read, I'm also reading Haaretz. I'm following the posts of Omdim Biyachad, Standing Together, the New Israel Fund, Trua, and for not so much news, but some analysis, there is a writer, an academic, who's actually based in Portland at Lewis and Clark, David Schraub, who has some very interesting and incisive analysis about anti-Semitism in the discourse, but also, this is not as eloquent as he would say it, but the ways that Israel needs to get its act together. So his blog is called The Debate Link.
Thank you for being here. I'm finding it hard to put my question together, but I'll try. So I grew up on the movie Exodus, and I went to Israel on a leadership program. Sorry, my mask is... Yeah, I just don't want to cough on anybody. And have a lot of pride, and thought I was fairly well educated about the origins of the State of Israel. However, my day-to-day work is with primarily young people of color and working for environmental justice. And I find that in this work space, there's a lot of judgment about Jews right now, and I'm finding I don't have words to even discuss with people because it's turning into a people of color versus Jewish people. I mean, that's the thing I'm hearing, is that Israel is no different than white colonialists, and Arabs are in solidarity with people of color here. And I thought, well, maybe I'll see what young people are reading. So I just went to Wikipedia about, origins of the State of Israel, just to see. And I was shocked that it had very little about the aspirations of Jewish people for the State of Israel, but more about I don't know if they were atrocities, but atrocities during the war to create the State of Israel, including poisoning of Arab wells and things like that. And now I'm lost. So I just hope that you can talk more about how do us as Jews in a fairly liberal community, where there's a lot of racial awareness and support for issues of people of color, how do we have a conversation around where is our place? Thanks.
Well, it's a really good question, and I don't think there's a simple answer to that question. I know that particularly younger people, maybe that's not fair, this is a general statement, maybe it's true, maybe it's not, but I do believe younger people tend to use social media more than older people do, perhaps, or maybe look at it with less of a critical eye. And I think often social media, and not just social media, simplifies, distorts, often like slogans. And I think that it's very difficult for many people to be discerning enough to understand what those mean and how simplified and distorted they actually can be. I also think that slogans that, for example, from the river to the sea, I think lots of people don't know what that means. You know, it does mean the destruction of the state of Israel. And I don't know that, I don't know the majority, many people who say that slogan or believe that slogan actually know what it really means. I absolutely agree with you that it is understandable that people of color will tend to identify with the underdog. And the underdog is certainly the Palestinians. And so in my own experience and from what I've read, there is a sort of an alignment in that way, at least from what we read in the media. How to address that? I think addressing that is the way one addresses it with anybody, which is let's kind of stop the sloganeering and really delve into the story and the history. And it, you know, some people said it's really simple. The Israelis are bad and the Palestinians are victims. It's not that simple. It's far more complicated than that. And honestly, my belief is there's plenty of blame to go around. And I won't be specific right now as to what, but I certainly could do that later. So I don't know that that really answers your question. I know it exists, and I perhaps for any kind of conflict, one has to say, let's back off, let's take the time to really understand, to read, to analyze the situation before making those kinds of simplistic statements or being on one side or the other. I don't know if that helps, but that's what I would have to say.
Lisa, I think Diane attributes more patience and attention span to your audience than likely there is. It's, I think, important, though perhaps not effective, to emphasize that things are not simple. And as Diane pointed out, and as you know, there is a coalition of victim card dealing communities around the world, and I don't say that to discredit their experience, but discursively, in language, it's sometimes laid down as a trump card. And given how little knowledge there is, I mean, we live in a country where young people are increasingly unfamiliar with what the Holocaust was, I think we can try to say that there is more to Israel than you saw on TikTok or on Instagram or wherever else. And one of the things about Israel, which is far from perfect, and we all have our concerns and our criticisms, is that it is in fact a very complex place made up of a whole bunch of different people. Israel's in many ways a more genuine melting pot than almost anywhere in the Arab world, and arguably than the United States itself. So rather than trying to diffuse those myths, which I think will elicit resistance, perhaps there's an opportunity to say, Israel is a multi-ethnic, multilingual, multiracial society which has its flaws, to be sure, but is trying to improve the rights of women and the rights of this community or that community and the other community if they can hear that, it's not the Israel they think they know, and perhaps there's some light to be shed there.
Thank you. First, let me say that from a spiritual perspective, I tend not to take sides, because conflict has two sides always. And the fact that Jewish people or Israel attracted this conflict, there means there is some lesson for Israelis to learn, or Jewish people to learn. And I will leave that aside for a minute, because you asked about the narrative. So I think the Palestinians and some radical Muslims are controlling a narrative that switched a little bit from terror to delegitimizing Israel in the world. By doing that, basically, they wanted to convince the world that Israel does not have a right to exist. How they do that? By taking several narratives and planting them in the minds of the West, who's buying them easily. And why they do that, in my opinion, because they want to mask their own true plans of the radical Islams of taking over the world, which they say. And let me give it, just today I saw like a video they put it on TikTok, of Hamas people shooting an Israeli tank. And a few hours later, it just turned out that they took it from a video game, and they just wanted to show, hey, look how brave we are. Still 400,000 likes. Yeah, Hamas is great. But let's get into a little bit deeper. I mean, they use several narratives. One is colonialism. Okay, Israel is colonialist. Israel was never a colonialist. Go read what the definition of colonialism is: utilizing a country for exploiting its resources, and you see that it was never. It was a UN decision, partition plan. They refused, they attacked us. The rest is history. But who is exactly a colonist? I mean, radical Islam wants to conquer the whole world, so I think they are more colonialist than us. Apartheid. Israel is not an apartheid state, okay? Arabs in Israel have full rights. Israel does whatever it does in the West Bank for security reasons. This is not apartheid. It's not based on racial. But according to radical Islams, if you want to live in the world under the Sharia, you either convert to Islam, live as a second-degree citizen, or die. So who actually believe in apartheid, genocide? Israel never intended to kill all Palestinians. God forbid, we try to save every life. But from the river to the sea means, hey, all Jewish people, either to the sea or dead, because that's what they believe. And human rights, I don't want to even start there. So I think that's their agenda, to try to mask their intention by blaming Israel for everything. Now, I'm not saying Israel is great with everything. Of course we make mistakes. Of course we killed some innocent people, and I'm very sorry for that, and we try not to. But it is not our ideology. Our ideology is to save life, not murder innocent people. And in social media, they take those one story and they make it the whole thing, because it's part of the radical Islam propaganda.
Do you want to say something first?
Yeah. So, responding to just a little bit, if that's okay.
Yeah.
If that's okay. All right.
I think people want you to be real here.
Okay. So Eytan said he took a class from me that was great, and I have to tell you, I love Eytan, but we don't always agree on everything. And so I want to say something here that I would disagree with you on, or at least modify a couple of the things you said. And I won't go back to the last question, just to this, I won't go back before this last question. So I do think it could be argued that the West Bank is apartheid. It's not a state. It's not a state, but it has basically all the elements of apartheid. And I think that I think it's okay to say that, and to acknowledge that this is one of Israel's big mistakes, in my view. That doesn't lessen my support for the country. I am a Zionist. I believe in a Jewish state, absolutely. But I do think there is apartheid on the West Bank, and that's, there are Palestinian villages totally separate from Jewish Israeli settlements, separate roads, separate schools, separate hospitals, everything is separate. And that is basically the definition of apartheid, and it's done by the state. The Israeli state has done this. So I think I used to want to deny that because it sounded so terrible. And now I'm willing to say, yeah, I think there's plenty of elements there that looks like apartheid. What are we going to do about that? What is Israel going to do about that? Also, the idea of settler colonialism. I know that this is a standard trope for Palestinians and plenty of other people, that Israel is a settler colonial state. I actually would argue that it has some of the elements of a settler colonial state, but that it's not, except beyond the Green Line in the West Bank. I think it is. And again, that does not lessen for me my love for the country, but I need to acknowledge that Israel has done some pretty damn bad things that cannot just be suggested it's just the bad Palestinians. Do you want to argue with me?
We invited Diane and Shaul for Thanksgiving. Yes, uninviting.
Then I won't bring them my food that I was going to make.
My children are really mad that we forgot to invite people for Thanksgiving, so you can come to us. Anyway, I know. Okay, I want to share some follow-up thoughts and reflections, and then there's a question from YouTube, and then if you have more thoughts, you're welcome to share. You're welcome to ask questions. I just want to say, yes to the pain of what you shared, Lisa, that people we're working with, people we are collaborating with over perhaps decades, people we think of as allies and partners in solidarity, that we are feeling so mutually foreign to each other in this moment. That is very painful. And this is not a thing I would encourage anybody to post on Facebook, but if we're in one-on-one conversations where people are calling Israel a settler colonialist state, I would ask, and I have asked, where do you want the Jews to go back to? Where do you want 7 million Jews who were expelled from North Africa, who were in DP camps in Europe, to go back to nowadays? And I didn't answer my question because I think I'm going rogue. I'm not supposed to be opining. I'm just supposed to be moderating, but it needs to be named that Zionism was a very fringe movement among the global Jewish community. It was like the really weird idealists and dreamers throughout the early 20th century. Everyone else was interested in assimilation, in emigration to the United States, in pursuing political equality in the countries where they were living. And it was the Shoah, the Holocaust, that changed that catapulted Zionism into relevancy, because if Jews had been welcome and safe anywhere else in the world, Zionism would have never taken off. I would argue. You're more of an expert, Diane, but so you can correct me if I'm wrong.
I won't correct you, but I'll just tell you, I have heard the answer to your question is where Jews should go, and a typical answer from Palestinians is that's not my problem.
I agree. I don't think it's Palestinians' problem, but I think it is the problem of white people of Christian European descent who want to criticize Israel, to criticize Jews, or anyone in America who wants to weigh in on this question. Yeah, you want to speak to me? Yeah.
I just want to say an additional word to Lisa. We can't let the crap that's being heaped on Israel dissuade us from doing the important social work we do wherever we do it in the world, because that's what we do, try to do, what we aspire to as a Jewish community. So it's really hard and it hurts. But we can't mirror that. We have to keep sticking up for those who need our help and offer it as we're able. And Diane thinks that all of this will pass a little bit more quickly than I do. Hopefully some of those people will, in the long haul, realign and we can get back to coalition building.
The other observation that I want to share, just based on the exchange that recently happened, is that when people talk about Israel, even that word is not a clear word. Some people, if you're gonna say really adamantly that Israel is definitively a multicultural, non-apartheid state, you're talking about Israel proper. You're talking about 1948 Israel within the Green Line, which is officially the Israel that exists. Some people are talking about Israel plus 1967, Israel and the territories and the West Bank. And when people are criticizing Israel, especially people who are only of late coming to political opinions, they are not necessarily always clear on what they are criticizing, or the fact that there is a distinction between 1948 Israel and 1967 Israel. In that vein, I think this question that came from YouTube is going to be relevant. Can you explain the right of return? Diane can.
Okay, so the right of return is as follows. The right of return is the notion, the idea, that any Palestinian and their descendants, any Palestinian who was basically kicked out of the state of Israel in 1948 and 1949, or who left because of war. And let me say, you may or may not know this, those 700,000, 800,000 Palestinians who were forced to leave because of war or because they were expelled by the new state of Israel were not allowed to return. Okay, they were not allowed to return. So the idea of the right of return is all those people and their descendants have the right to return, not to a new Palestinian state, that's a foregone conclusion, but to Israel. And the right of return has always been one of those final status issues when we talk about a resolution to this conflict. You know, statehood, borders, Jerusalem, and the right of return. Israel has always said there cannot be a full right of return. It's impossible. And what has often been cited as a possible number, both by Israeli government and the Palestinian Authority, is they would let in about 100,000. That would not change the demographic balance in Israel. That has never, and it has been not exactly agreed to formally by the Palestinian Authority, but there has been talk about, yes, maybe we'll go that route. It's never come to that, but that's what the right of return is.
Can I add some things?
I don't know.
No turkey for you. So the right of return is much more serious than what we think, although they agreed in the past negotiations in Camp David and Annapolis 2000-2006 on a number of 100,000 of right of return. What Yasser Arafat, was the head of the PLO, told his people is that he basically rejected Israel's offer to give him almost 96 or 97 of the demands because he didn't want to be the one who will give up the right of return of the Palestinian people, meaning all of them going back to Israel, to the land of Israel. That is why he disagreed, and he did it by throwing Jerusalem into the picture. That's what he told his people. So the right of return for them is not about negotiation. It's a request or demand that they have for a full right of return, which means, of course, that the state of Israel would not exist, and nobody is willing to negotiate over that. Now, some of them say, yeah, Abu Mazen negotiated that. Abu Mazen holds the theory of stages he adopted from Ahmed Yassin, who was a leader in Hamas, meaning we will get what we can now, and later we will get the rest. That is what Abu Mazen, the Holocaust denier, believes. Now, of course, that's something they wouldn't tell the West. I'm sorry that I sound so radical. I just want to give you facts. These are facts. You can go Google them. It's not my opinion. I'm not against Palestinian. Please, please, please understand that. I want to have peace, and I wish there would be a two-state solution in which they would give up the right of return and the fight against Israel. As long as they don't do that, we cannot negotiate with them because they hold a stages theory, meaning we'll take what we can take now, and when we're stronger, then we'll take the rest. You cannot negotiate like that. And that's an obstacle to any peace agreement.
And just to add that it's one of the things that makes Israel unique and vital is that if you're Jewish, you can go there. That's also a right. And I can understand how that can be harsh for those who come from there but cannot return. And then they say, but you don't come from there, you're European, or you're going back 2,000 years or whatever. We have no end of things that we can argue about. But in the world in which I live, it's very important to me that there is a country that I know will take me, and they won't impose upon me criteria. If I need a place to go, that place exists. That's Israel. And that's something that will remain complex and contentious, but the fact of this world is that we need that place.
Sorry, two things that I forgot. In terms of refugees, UNRWA, which is the UN body that deals with the Palestinian refugees, the only UN body that was made for Palestinians. The 700,000 refugees in Syria, millions in other places, they don't have their own body. Another thing is that Palestinians are the only one who can inherit their refugee status even for 3 generations. Other refugees just assimilate in their state, don't become refugees anymore. With Palestinians, they just inherit their status. That's why the UN basically perpetuate this conflict and this status. I mean, what as a Palestinian, 3rd generation living in South America wants to come back to the state of Israel? That makes no sense. Well, it is if you understand their radical ideology, that radical Islam believes that every land that was occupied by Muslims in the past must be reoccupied. That is why I believe, unless they change their ideology, there's no way to negotiate, because they don't want to negotiate. They want it all.
So I want to add something, which is we know, because of survey after survey after survey, that the vast majority of Palestinian refugees who have been resettled elsewhere will not return, do not want to go back to Israel. So in a way, it's a moot point. It's about 8%. Somewhere between 7 and 10% would want to return, but that's not very many. So one of the ways that people have had to sort of tweak this is to say, okay, you have the right to return, but you're not going to be able to. You have the right. We understand. Israel said, we understand. You have that right. But because we have to be careful of the demographic balance, we want to continue this as a Jewish state, we cannot have hundreds of thousands or millions return. So you may have the right, but it's not going to actually happen. But remember, most of them don't want to return anyway because they have been resettled.
I'm going to take a somewhat different cut on this. I'm sympathetic to the Palestinians and their discourse of return. We have Pesach, and we say next year in Yerushalayim, and we say that all over the world, and we've been saying it for a couple thousand years. And we try our best to teach that to our children and to maintain their bond with Eretz Israel. I can't imagine denying Palestinians or anybody else similar chords in their identity. So I'm not trying to say that they're not connected. I'm not trying to tell them, teach your children that Buenos Aires is where you belong. It's a question of how we pursue competing aspirations in a very small space. And one of the things that's part of the Palestinian tragedy is that their leadership has continually overpromised and underdelivered on just about everything. So telling the Palestinian people that you will get your home back, and that it will be from the river to the sea, and that everyone will go back to their kfar and to their town, that's not possible. It doesn't serve the Palestinians well. It doesn't serve anyone well. But I, for myself, I hear them. I hear their connection to the land. I get it. That's me too. And I don't want to deny them that. I just want to work with them so that we can achieve as little discord and as much harmony in pursuing those similar aims as possible. Right now, that's not a whole lot.
Looks like maybe there's another question stepping forward, but as that happens, if you want to ask a question, please do come to the microphone so that everyone can hear it. In the meantime, I just want to reflect on the profundity of what you both just said, because it's not just competing aspirations. It's also competing narratives of the past. And I think a great deal of healing could happen if Palestinians could hear Jews saying, yeah, we acknowledge you have a legitimate claim. Even if demographically we're not going to let you pursue it, we acknowledge that the claim is legitimate. And it has to be admitted that so many Jewish voices, especially the far-right voices in Israel, have refused to acknowledge the Palestinians exist, let alone that they have a legitimate claim. Similarly, I think a great deal of healing could happen if Jews and Israelis could hear the Arab world, could hear Palestinians saying, we acknowledge that you have a legitimate claim to your presence here. So I see we have...
Okay, this is really, really quick. So one night when I was living with a Watif and her family in the village, I got up in the middle of the night and I was walking down the hall and I saw her. It was probably 3 o'clock in the morning, and I saw her sort of in a darkened little room where the TV was, with a little light on, and she was looking at a book. It was an atlas, it turns out, and she was sobbing. And I walked up to her, I said, Awatif? And she said, look at this land. This is Palestinian land. And it was an atlas that she was looking at. That's just a quick example of, yes, acknowledging the feelings that something was lost. And it really was lost. And that happens in war. And people lose their home, and people lose their land, and people sometimes lose their lives. And that's the way of the world. But to acknowledge that we had a part in that is an important thing to do, in my view.
We have some questioners.
Hi, my name's Jason Sides. I'm really good. Our families, the Streisfelds and our families are really, really close. This has been difficult for me, but I'll start with a podcast recommendation. Ezra Klein, he does podcasts for the New York Times. I've been listening to him for years, since before he was at the New York Times. He just had a really good episode. It was the sermons that I needed to hear, and it was an interview with a rabbi down in Los Angeles, and I would just really highly recommend it. It was great. It taught me a lot, and I think it really analyzed the situation from both sides. It was wonderful. I'm really worried that what we're seeing right now happening in Israel to the Gazans is, I'm going to say the G word, is genocide. The UN, I think the UNRWA, they just, I think on November 16th, it's like 36 special raconteurs said that they see a genocide happening over there. There's 12,000, 13,000 Palestinians that have been killed. So it's about 10 times as many Israelis that have been killed in the current conflict. And I see the images of just bombed out northern Gaza, just flattened. And I cry about it, and I lose sleep over it. And my question would just be, do you think it's a genocide that's happening there right now?
I do not think it's genocide. If I recently looked up the definitions of genocide and the descriptions of genocide, let me say it's bad enough. It's horrible. It may be a war crime. It is not genocide. Genocide is the deliberate killing of a group of people to get rid of them. That is not what's happening in Gaza. Every death is horrible. I feel like you do, horrible about it. I think it needs to stop. But I think there are conditions that have to be met before it can stop, actually. But no, it is not genocide.
I'm sympathetic to your question and struggling as you are. When it comes to affixing labels and making judgments of these sorts, the world actually isn't very good at defining what genocide might be, because there are different conflicts with different scales and they get to parsing. And I think when we do that, to some degree, we're losing sight. Whether or not it's genocide, while we might be bound up in that determination, people are suffering. Children are suffering. And the bombs that are falling on them are our bombs. And I think that one of the dimensions of this is that we need to demand of our leadership that they find ways to pursue the aim of our safety at less cost to the civilian population of Gaza and anywhere else. When I was a soldier, we were taught the rules of war. And the rules were that you do what you can, even at risk to yourself, to avoid harming non-combatants. That's basically impossible in Gaza, partly because of Palestinian design. But that doesn't relieve us of the obligation to try to reduce. So I don't spend too much time wrestling with the definition, though there'll be plenty of that in the weeks, months, and years to come. Rather, I say, how can we make it less bad sooner rather than later for all of the people who are innocent victims of this conflict on all sides?
For once, I agree with my two partners here. I grieve every loss of life. I've seen so many deaths in the army, some of them what we call terrorists, but the minute they die, I see a young person who lost her way, who came to kill us, but we had to kill him, sometimes her, and I'm sad because that's ignorance. Whenever we kill people, that's ignorance. But what can we do right now? Is there another way to eliminate Hamas without hurting civilians? If there is a way, I urge the Israeli government to do it. I don't know of any other way, because Hamas uses people as human shields and prevent them from fleeing. Israel gave them 2 weeks to leave. They didn't. Now, what's the child's fault? It's not. What is the option? It's to let Hamas prevail and hold all the hostages until they decide to do something else. This war can end right now if Hamas surrendered, bring back the hostages, and say, we're not going to fight you anymore. Israel will not shoot even one bullet. Until then, do you have any other solution to the situation? Unless you have, I'm very, very, very sorry for every loss. Okay, but I don't think we have another choice right now.
I'm going to ask a follow-up question because I think our questioners are being kind of easy on you guys. And we did promise tough questions. So I'm going to ask one, which is, like, let's speak to and acknowledge the reality that there are Israeli politicians voted on by the Israeli people who have explicitly called for genocide. We're not, I think I agree. There's a very good, if you want the analytical, heady framework, David Schraub's blog, The Debate Link, that I recommended earlier. He has an amazing blog post from a week or two ago titled "How Many Genocides Are Occurring in the World Right Now?" And by some definitions, what is happening in Gaza is genocide, and by some definitions, it is not. But you know, to the extent that Hamas has genocidal fantasies, which we hope they will not be able to carry out, God forbid, we have heard Jewish Israelis articulating genocidal fantasies about Hamas. And we know that there is a right-wing, militant, messianic, radical Jewish vision of Greater Israel that is just as violent as the vision of radical Islam that Eytan has described. So what's to be done about that, I guess is the question I would ask. And how do we think about this and envision a path forward while acknowledging the really problematic things coming out of, so to speak, our own family?
Well, okay, so you had to ask a real tough question. Okay. Yes, for sure. There are Israelis in government who speak of genocide. That's for sure. It is the most right-wing, hawkish, racist, authoritarian government in Israeli history. And before October 7th, there were hundreds of thousands of Israelis marching in the street every week, opposed to particular things that they were trying to do to the court, but in general, against this government. I think it's like, okay, I don't know. I think there's a possibility that after this is over, that government is going to fall and there will become a more moderate government. I believe that may be true. However, that there are some Jewish Israelis in the streets and in government who would like to see a genocide of the Palestinians, I do not believe that this is the policy of the Israeli government or the IDF. I continue to stand by my analysis that this in Gaza is not a genocide. Now, again, does that mean, oh, well, then it's okay that, you know, thousands of people are killed? And no, of course not. But to use that term genocide means something. And it really means something, and I do not think it stands the test of definition, of description, and I don't think it should be used.
We come for Thanksgiving dinner now? Always. I love them. I love you.
So it's really a separate topic, Israel's leadership and what do we do about that. In looking back, it's clear that steps towards peace are not made by weak Israeli leaders because they don't survive. They're only made by strong Israeli leaders. And that sometimes it's the Arik Sharons of the world who can say, we're going to get out of there, and they can get away with it. I'm very alarmed and more by the nature and tenor of the current Israeli government. Looking back at the period after the Yom Kippur War, we know that there can in Israel, or could be in Israel, accountability for what you let them do to us. And I am waiting with somewhat bated breath to see in what ways will the Netanyahu government be held to account. I don't think that it's going to flip the political table. I'm not living in fantasy land. But it may be that the politics of Israel are affected sufficiently by the price that Israel has paid in terms of its blood loss and the price that the government doesn't seem to realize that they're paying, but they are and will continue to pay in terms of standing around the world with Jewish communities and others, that there will be some more sensible leadership from that swath of Israeli society that will say, we'll do better by avoiding what happened on October 7th. And we won't avoid that by banging on them, because that serves their interests. They'll come back. I don't think that it's genocide. That would shift things. But I hope that they're learning the lesson, that they have to take a different approach in order to, as pathetic as it sounds, win elections. I hope that lessons will be learned that will have the Israeli populace hold their own leaders to account for this, and that there will be some shift.
So two points. I mean, I read and hear what Israeli thinks, and the rage in Israel is it's amazing right now. And of course, I hear many say, just wipe out Gaza and get rid of this problem once and for all. From a spiritual perspective, I don't think killing other people solve the problem, because you're going to meet them in different lifetimes. So you have to deal with them rather than kill them. On the other hand, when we send our soldiers, and my nephews and special forces in front line, do I risk his life, or I clean out the neighborhood before they march in? And that's a big question. Our life versus theirs. And I'm not telling you from my own perspective, but for many Israelis, wipe out, that's what they believe, wipe out Gaza, not to risk any more soldiers' lives. Right, not right? I think you can answer that only when you have a family member right now in Gaza fighting terrorists who did some terrible thing and made us do what we do. And another thing is, most people in Gaza voted Hamas and still support Hamas. So many people in Israel say, well, if they support Hamas, then they are terrorists themselves. I'm not saying they are, they're not, but just understand how Israelis feel right now after what happened in October 7, rather than just say, okay, 13,000 died, it's terrible, Israel should stop. It's more complex than that.
You can, but technically we're ending in 10 minutes. So do you want me to?
Okay. I think at this point we actually don't know how many Gazans support Hamas. My guess is the support has really gone down. And we're not really going to know how much, because they haven't had an election since 2006. So, okay. But I just want to add something that I think is important to add. We've been talking about the Israeli government, and I think it's important to talk about the Israeli government and where it is now. What bugs me, worries me, concerns me, is the idea of let's restart the peace process. I'm for peace, and I think it would be great if a peace process were restarted. But we have to really not just think about the Israeli government, but the Palestinian Authority. Let's say Hamas is gone. You have the Palestinian Authority. They have never agreed to any offer that was given to them, and the offers were good. And that's just the truth. In 2000, 95%, 94 to 96% of the West Bank and all of Gaza, no, that wasn't good enough. And there was no counteroffer. In 2008, Olmert offered Mahmoud Abbas 95% of the West Bank and all of Gaza. And you know what he did? He walked away. He just walked away. So, and these are the moderates. So unless there is new leadership, unless there's a shift in the old leadership, I don't know what the peace process would look like, honestly. It's beyond me to figure out what that would be. So I just want to say, it's not just the Israelis' fault in terms of this government. Palestinians have not shown good faith in any willingness to compromise.
So this is clearly a very riveting discussion, and it is 8:50 already, and I see that we have, I believe, 3 or 4 questioners waiting. So what I'm going to do is invite everyone to share the questions that they want to share without you responding to any of them, plus questions I've got written down that have come in via YouTube, and then I'll let each of you share your final thoughts in response to those questions or not. Does that work for everyone, sort of satisficing with the time we have left? So go ahead.
My question is, we've had over an hour of conversation and not, except for I think one person has addressed the issue of hostages. And I would like you to talk about your perspective on what is required. I think I heard Diane say that there were conditions for a ceasefire or something like that. So those 2 words haven't really been discussed, and I would like to hear each of your perspectives on that. We have a recent letter issued by one of our statewide elected officials talking about a ceasefire, and I'm curious about whether you believe that hostage releases are conditional, and just I would like you to expand on that. Thank you.
I think we should really stop that's big. Rather than
I think there are, I'm going to say I think there are going to be a lot of good questions, so let's hear them all and have our panelists speak to what they want to speak to.
Hi, I'm Aaron Taylor. I'm a pastor here in town, have been for 34 years. I'm also the state director for Christians United for Israel. And I want you to know our heart breaks for your entire community. I'd love to say I understand. I don't understand at all. But having been to Israel many times, many friends in Israel, many connections in Israel, been to the Senate and the Congress to make sure that the Iron Dome is there, that anti-Semitism is taught, in our school system. Holocaust is taught in our school system. That's our agenda. That's our heart. Is just simply that. And that being said, probably one of the hardest things for those on the outside of the community who love your community. I love your community because Christianity doesn't exist without you. So I have no faith outside of that. And so we love you for that. We also have seen the atrocities. I've been to Poland with a Holocaust survivor, a dear friend of mine. And I will say this, one of the hardest things for an outsider to understand, and I think I understand it a little, is the conflict within the Jewish community. And I understand there's disagreements with the government. I was there a year ago when they were marching in the streets and, we were in our hotel not wanting to get killed in the outside, I get that. And I understand the conflict we've had in America over every war. And there's always those who say, I want peace. I think everyone that is a decent human being wants peace. But sometimes it's difficult.
Nudge you towards your question, please.
So my question is, from the outside, we're looking to say, okay, where's the unity within? What is the Jewish community standing on together? And that is hard. And so I guess that's my question, is we want to support Israel. I'm a Zion, I would consider myself a Christian Zionist. I want to support you as a community. And I understand there's different opinions, but it's hard to feel like we know we're on your side when there is conflict within you to that degree. And I mean, just understand our heart. We're like, where are we going to take a side? Because everybody's so, and I think this discussion's good. But right now, when there's war, the one thing we do have to do, because it's war, it's not a conflict, it's war. The one thing we do have to do is come back to a place of, we're going to have to support what has to be done to some degree. And so we can all bind together. So I think that's it, is maybe more, maybe it's a comment, not a question, but we want to support you and the peace system, the peace process. I have my own opinions on all of it, But during this difficult thing, and I've talked to the hostage families.
Thank you.
So,
I'm going to
yeah, go ahead.
ask us to hear from the next person.
Hello, my name is Lynn Jacobson, and thank you for this. It's been a really great discussion. I think it's good for all of us to be thinking through these very challenging questions. And there was a poll that came out through the Birzeit University, and I was wondering if you could address that. It was about the high percentage of, and I believe it was in the West Bank, Judea, Samaria, of what their position was, whether October 7th was October 7th was a valid response or not, and what their opinions were. And looking forward, is Mahmoud Abbas even a peace partner when you're seeing these kind of polls? And can you even trust them? So I'd love to just hear your thoughts and your opinions about this poll that just came out. So thank you.
There's a question, I suspect it's a rhetorical question that came in from YouTube, which is that Ukrainians were allowed to flee to Poland. Why were Gazans not allowed into Egypt? And then I'm going to also ask a follow-up question for you to throw in your hopper for the last, we'll let you go over and give each of you 5 more minutes, which is just to say, not just what do you think the next thing is that needs to happen, but what's the thing after that, right? If the next thing is you take out all of Hamas's infrastructure, then what is the responsibility of Israel and the global Jewish community after that has been accomplished? So we take out Hamas's infrastructure and bring the hostages home. Yes, we need to say those words, but then the next thing after that.
I'm not going to go first this time.
Me? Oh, so many questions. Ceasefire and hostages. I believe that if we, I read the statement and he says, yeah, one of the conditions is that Hamas will lay down their weapon and return on the hostages after ceasefire. Say, good luck to that. Hamas believes in dying as shaheeds. If you don't force them, they will not bring back the hostages. Why would they do that? They don't care about land. They care about everything. So I said in return and in response, so let's do that. Let's give them a 5-day ceasefire. If they return the hostages and lay down the weapon, then we'll all celebrate. If not, then nobody says one word about ceasefire from now on. If they agree to that, fine. I want ceasefire. Trust me, I don't want to risk any lives on either side. Conflict about the Jewish community. I think from spiritual perspective, we Jewish people attract, in a way, some atrocities to make us united again. We all know what happened before October 7, and I'm not making the link because it's too bad. But we were divided, and right now in Israel at least, we're united. And it happened many times in the past. So I think as Jewish people, this is one of our lessons, to be united, have differences, it's fine, but not divide the people, because this is the message to the whole world. It's unity consciousness. We're all coming from the same God. We cannot kill each other. We're all brothers and sisters. If we forget that as Jewish people, how can we teach that to the world? So that is our message right now. And that goes back to the last question, is what can we learn from this? Learn that. We're all united. We're all brothers and sisters. Doesn't matter if we're Arabs, Palestinian, cockroaches, or this table, okay? We're all part of the same God. And killing each other, of course, it's not a solution. Sometimes we have to defend ourselves, but let's focus just on that and not more. The Birzeit, yeah, 82% of the Palestinians support Hamas in what they did, which is why Palestinians in the West Bank don't trust Abu Mazen, and they like Hamas. Can you negotiate with them? Right now, I don't think so. They teach their kids that Israel is the Satan and should be wiped out. When they change their ideology, then we can talk to them. Why Gazans are not going to Egypt? Well, ask Egypt. Egypt hates Hamas. Don't believe what they say. They hate Hamas because they hate the Muslim Brotherhood, and Hamas is related to Muslim Brotherhood. Saudi Arabia hates Hamas. Jordan hates Hamas. Egypt and other countries, they just don't say it out loud. That's why Egypt doesn't want Gazan people in Egypt. Israel would love to send them to Egypt. They just don't want to.
I think that last Eytan is framing a little bit too narrowly. It's not just Hamas that is not welcome in the Arab world, it's the Palestinian people that are not welcome in the Arab world. They have never been served well, not from that denial of statehood in 1947 and not since. And that's one of the things that makes life particularly hard for the Palestinians, that nominally they're in a sea of their own, but they're really quite isolated and they're frequently abandoned and even orphaned. But coming back, I would say for me, it's not about them, it's about us. For Israel, this is a lose-lose situation, and it's getting worse every day. There may be progress in demolishing infrastructure and all of that. I'm impressed that Hamas still has rockets to fire at us. We're talking about a tiny space, and the Israeli army is swarming on it. And yet, they're still punching at us. And so long as the conflict persists, that will persist. So in the moment, things are terrible. And thinking down the line, I don't want to keep repeating this. So how do we achieve a paradigm shift? And I don't have a good answer. I would say, though, that when you are able to have people see one another beyond the rhetoric, they're capable of seeing certain things that you think they might not be able to. So one of the things that I'm interested in is shifting from claims about rights to claims about needs. Everybody can claim Jerusalem. I need to be able to have some part of that in which I can park my car and I can buy my bread. Fine, you buy your bread over there, but it's still mine. Okay, I don't like your claim, but I can buy my bread. People are actually fairly capable of getting along if we let them. That's one of the lessons I've learned from different parts of the world and their conflicts. We're not really letting them get along. So that's one thing that I think we could work towards, which is to have a healthier engagement from outside. We remember that at times conversations have only happened because each side has been taken by the scruff of their neck by outside powers and shaken and led to the table and told to sit and made to talk. I wish that there were other ways, and I don't count on that one as being any sort of guarantee. But what I know is that right now things are awful and they're getting worse, and that as long as the violence continues, that will be true. So we need to shift the paradigm to some degree. They're incapable at the moment of doing that themselves. They need help. We're not capable of doing it. We need help. The help isn't especially qualified, but that doesn't mean we don't try. So that's something for the community here to think about. And also, along with that, and maybe this is a pipe dream, but get people to recognize that others are there and that they count, and that every time we simplify and make it clean that one is right and one is wrong, we're also wrong.
I want to sort of temper both of your statements in terms of nobody likes the Palestinians and Gaza doesn't want them and nobody else does either. And actually it's true. I mean, Egypt doesn't want them, not Gaza doesn't want them. In a way it is true, but we also have to remember that the countries we're talking about, Egypt, Lebanon, Jordan, Syria, all of them are in terrible shape. They are poor. Some of them are going through Syria warfare. Lebanon is on the brink of collapse. To take in a large amount of Palestinians, they believe would further destabilize their countries, and they're probably right. So I get the reluctance. I don't think it's because they hate the Palestinians in particular, but taking in a whole bunch of refugees with all the refugee problems that happen is very problematic. We know that in Egypt there's a large Muslim Brotherhood. The government now is quote unquote secular, but people coming in, and the government holds on to its power by really being very authoritarian and watching its people and limiting human rights and civil rights. They believe taking in many Palestinian refugees would be very problematic, and again, they're probably right. So that's why they are not, they're not being allowed to go through that Rafah crossing and into Egypt except for smaller numbers, and most of those numbers are heading out after they get to Cairo. They're going elsewhere. And by the way, the only country in the Middle East that has ever granted Palestinian citizenship is Jordan. They are not citizens, they're citizens in Israel, but they are not citizens in any other country except for Jordan. So
Which annexed the West Bank.
Well, yes, it did annex the West Bank in 1949. I don't want to get into this because the whole thing about collusion across the Jordan between Israel and Jordan during the war. But yes, the big winners of that 48 war were Israel, Egypt, that got Gaza. They thought it was a win, and Jordan, which got the West Bank. So as far as the hostages go, yeah, I think Israel has to do everything it can to get them back. And if that means a ceasefire for 24 hours or 48 hours and there's an agreement that the hostages go out, fine. Or if there can't be an agreement, keep working for one. I mean, I think that's extremely important. And we know some of them are already dead. We don't know how many are still alive. You know, that Birzeit study, I don't know if it was done with students at Birzeit or if it was done larger. But Birzeit University is a Palestinian university in the town of Birzeit, and it's always been known as quite radical left. And so if it was done with students at Birzeit, it is not at all a surprise to me that the vast majority of them would say that October 7th was justified. And what worries me about that is, let's assume it was students at Birzeit, and I say there needs to be new leadership. You know, I'm not sure where that leadership could come from that would be finally willing to compromise to get to a state and peace. So far, that hasn't happened. So I don't know what comes next.
I do think there has been a lot of reflection on what Palestinians would need to do, and I'd love to hear if any of you want to share a final thought about what that which is more within our sphere of influence, what Israel would need to do, what American Jews should be doing to get to a tenable situation in the future, if any of you want to.
We should do what we should have done in Mount Sinai 3,000 years ago and hold unity consciousness instead of thinking that we are the best and they are not worth it, or any other version of dividing humanity. And it starts from us, from home, feeling that we are together, bringing more light to this world, bringing more love to this world, instead of spreading hatred. Now, most Jewish people don't spread hate. It's not what we do. Yeah, but we are divided. We have questions in Israel what it is to be Jewish, what is the nature of the state of Israel. While it's legitimate to ask these questions, it's not legitimate to divide the country like we did a few months ago. And when that happens, I think we're taking it too far in the way we divide each other. And I think for us, in order to learn from the conflict, we have to reunite and respect every life for whatever it is.
I had the very odd experience of being in an Israeli settlement in Gaza not long before it ceased to exist. And Rabbi Meir Kahane was there, and he was encouraging its residents to resist, and to resist by force if necessary. What was it that they were going to resist? They were going to resist the Israeli bulldozers, the Israeli army that was going to pluck them out of there and end those settlements and take Israel administratively and militarily out of the Gaza Strip. Arik Sharon did that, not a man I admire. But I think that Israel has to a certain degree, quit waiting for agreement from the other side, because as we've heard, as we know, the other side doesn't agree. We offer 96% and they say no. And I understand that to an extent, because if you're the Palestinian who says yes to 96%, another Palestinian puts a bullet in your head and you're done because you sold out. I don't. 96% isn't 96% from their perspective. Sure. But whatever the percentage is, there's a risk from their absolutists. But I would simply say this, and Diane doesn't put much stock in my notion, that we stop asking and we start telling. Here's your Palestinian state. We're done there. And you're responsible for it. And set yourselves up with the help of your allies, but we will defend ourselves. And in having done that, I would hope we would have regained some moral ground, high or not, and that the world would say, okay, so Israel did its part in this, and it did it in a way that allows the Palestinians a chance, and it's on them now to make that happen and to thrive, and that in part shifts the paradigm. I wish that would happen for many reasons. One of them is that we have a significant Palestinian population inside Israel, and their struggles are, some of them common and some of them unique. And I wish that there would be that era in which we really can not have this other Palestinian thing dividing Israel within. But those are all difficult things to achieve. Can't happen as long as we're waiting for the Palestinians to say yes. So don't wait, just do it.
I don't really have much to add. My reservation about what Joel said, he said, I don't put much stock in it, is that something similar happened when Ariel Sharon left Gaza. He said, we're out of here. Army's going, settlements are going, people are going, and look what happened in Gaza. Now, I get that statehood is different than not statehood, but I think there are probably many steps that need to be taken before a viable Palestinian state could really exist, whether they agree or whether we say, here it is, and do what you want to do. I think that there are steps that have to be taken. And some of them have to do with peace building, some of them have to do with truth and reconciliation groups, some of them have to do with building an economic infrastructure. The West Bank absolutely needs that, and Gaza, of course, is going to need much, much more than that. There has to be political alliances, all kinds of things have to happen for a Palestinian state to be viable. At this point, I don't see Israel doing that, giving up anything at this point. So for me, what has to happen is we have to have a new government, both in Israel and the Palestinian Authority has to be reconstituted. I don't think Mahmoud Abbas can do anything at this. Well, I mean, he's going to die soon anyway. But him and his cronies, I just don't think they're going to do anything that will lead to statehood.
Eytan, Shaul, Diane, thank you for sharing of your expertise and your very personal experiences on this. Thank you all for choosing to spend a Monday evening on this. To the extent possible, Tzeitchem l'shalom, go in peace.